Yo, yo, yo. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Web3 Gaming Show, where we are here to uncover the world of Web3 gaming and hear from the people who are creating and pioneering its future. We'll be exploring the stories of game developers, community builders, content creators, and industry experts. Join us as we dive deep into the ever growing Web3 gaming space and learn more about the movers and shakers of this very exciting space. On our third episode of the Web3 Gaming Show, I am excited to talk to Kiefer Zang from the Economics Design, an expert in in-game economics and sustainable game economics. I met Kiefer a year ago through reaching out to individuals working in GameFi. We actually both graduated from the same college, Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Kiefer, how you doing today? I know it's a little bit early for you over there.
Hey Juan, I'm good. The day is just getting started, but talking about Web3 gaming is a pretty good way to start it.
Definitely. I'm sure that you have a lot of things on your plate today that you will be focused on Web3 gaming, but would love to hear a little bit more about how you got into the industry, like kind of what brought you into blockchain gaming.
Yeah, absolutely. So around 2014 or so was when I initially found Bitcoin, and it was actually through a site where it's one of those where you can kind of like watch different types of advertisements, get these kind of points or tokens in order to redeem them for things, primarily Steam keys. But it's also like you could play different like Flash games, get these different types of achievements and earn those tokens. And along with those kind of Steam game keys that initially brought me in, there was also Bitcoin there. And so I was like, oh, what's this? I'll check this out, and started getting into Bitcoin. And it was interesting because you could play games and get Bitcoin. So it was actually like a very, very early version of this play to earn gaming type of
Nice.
dynamic. And so got interested in Bitcoin. And around the same time, I was also deep into trading game items on Steam, mostly Team Fortress 2, a little bit of CSGO. And I really enjoyed that, but I didn't like the centralized aspect of it. Steam kept adding on these restrictions, making it harder and harder for me to just interact with the items I wanted to. So when I saw Ethereum start to get more popular around 2016 or so, saw the potential for having ownership of items as well as currencies in the crypto space. So I was watching very closely for innovations on that. When CryptoKitties came around, that was like the light bulb moment for me of like, okay, now we're starting to get this. I actually didn't buy into CryptoKitties because even back then I had a decent idea about sort of what was fundamentally driving purchases of digital assets. I'm like, okay, so you buy kitties just to breed more kitties to sell those kitties to other people who want to breed kitties.
Mm.
Little Ponzi-ish, so I skipped that one, but started watching the space very closely. Like bought into the Axie Origin sale in 2018, was all over like the first wave of crypto gaming, and actually got involved in a blockchain gaming project in 2018, essentially doing systems design for a crypto racing game. Fortunately, that one never got off the ground. We lost some developers when the bear market hit, so
Right.
but it got my foot in the door and continued to work doing some different types of modeling and incentive design for crypto casino and racing games, and then eventually made my way over to economics design and getting to work with some of the top Web3 games in the industry. Like Shrapnel, Scopely, Sparkadia, getting to design the future of Web3 gaming economies.
Yeah, that's amazing. You have literally been here since day one, which I think is absurd. Yeah, actually, yesterday I went out and I was speaking to people, and they were talking about like how they still want things to be centralized. Can you speak a little bit more about how you were essentially like were there was obstacles being created when you were trying to sell like items on CS:GO or on Steam?
Yeah, and so there is I understand to an extent why they did it. They're doing it sort of for user safety,
Mm,
for saying that some users kind of need a bit of handholding.
mm,
But it clashes a little bit with my, I guess, sort of libertarian mentality of like let people make their own decisions with their own assets.
mm.
But it's sort of saying that like you might be you might make a mistake, and so we're going to kind of enforce this on you to prevent you from making a mistake or make it easier to kind of get something back. And so we're kind of enforcing these trade restrictions to make it harder for you to make a mistake with and get scammed.
That makes sense. And then obviously, like when we have digital assets kind of verified by blockchain, that doesn't happen. And obviously, I think there's a lot of games currently experimenting with that, both like on an off-chain level and an on-chain level. I guess, but before we dive too deep into that, I would love to ask, like, what do you do in economics design, and how do you help game developers ultimately?
Yeah, so essentially help teams design or audit their game economies for sustainability. And so it helps them avoid the type of economic problems like what we've seen with Axie or Terra, where it wasn't about some technical security flaw, but it was an economic security
Mm,
flaw in the fundamental design of their product, where even if the core game experience was good, not necessarily saying Axie's originally was great,
yeah.
but the actual economic component of it became sort of the thing that kept them from being a long-term sustainable product. And so
Mm,
we help developers figure out, based on the different types of user personas in their system and their things that they want to incentivize or disincentivize, how do we figure out the different types of assets, asset utility, faucet and sinks, all that, do risk assessment, financial modeling, machination simulations, basically everything you need to figure out, go from 0 to 1 of putting an economy together and feeling good about it being something that's going to add to your product rather than being a potential risk that could take it all down.
definitely. Yeah, I think many more developers are questioning the value of Web3, and they're obviously approaching it in different ways. How have kind of game developers approached in-game economies in the past, kind of before blockchain and Web3?
Yeah, so in the past, it's been more of a closed economic system. And
Right.
so by that, it means that you essentially aren't allowed to trade the items or the currency that are in those economies outside of the scope of that game. So
Mm,
within that, actually, there are a bit of subcategories. So even in Web 2, there was a sort of range of how open or closed these economies were to get closer to where we are today with Web 3. On the very closed side, we have more single player experiences where there's no player to player trading, or even if it's a multiplayer game, all of the economic interaction. So any currency you have in the game is solely about your individual experience. You can't use that to trade items with another player.
mm,
Then you have other games, and this is getting, as an example, more towards the MMO side of things,
mm,
where players can trade with each other, but it's only still inside of that economy. So if I have some items, maybe I was mining some ore and was able to trade that to someone else for a weapon, I can do that. I can have that peer-to-peer trade, but I can't take that weapon and go sell it legitimately for some money. Or if I want to do that, this is critically where you have this black market component. And
mm,
and so you have these items that have real value in them with them. So this could be cosmetics like CS:GO. It could be things with in-game utility like Eve ships or like an RPG weapon. But you need to go to this black market to sell them. And the existence of that black market shows that there is fundamental demand for
mm,
in-game items, even though they're just pixels. They're not anything in the real world. It's still something that people find value in, and
mm.
so that what we're doing now going into Web3 is sort of legitimizing the trade of these assets that have real value.
Mm. Do you, I mean, I've obviously heard and have read a little bit more about like the black markets and the past game economies, which sounds weird to say. Do you think that opening this like this ecosystem up enables more people to essentially participate in that, or do you think it's the same amount of people that will find value in trading assets still?
Yeah, I think this does fundamentally grow your user base. And
Mm,
so if you think about the transition in monetization strategies for games, um, in terms of the cost to participate, this has been
mm,
gradually growing over time. And
mm,
so if you think back to like premium games or arcade games, there's this upfront cost in order to play. And so out of the total pool of people that could potentially play your game, you're only getting those that are willing to pay that
mm,
particular your upfront cost in order to play. And so that's some small subsection of the total addressable market. And now you add in free to play. And with free to play, you're expanding that market. And now it's people who are willing to participate and do this activity for free to get their foot in the door. Maybe you can monetize them down the line when they get it, but about getting them in the door, that's the amount of people you can target. But crucially, that's not the entire pool of people, because now getting into sort of economics side of things, there's an opportunity cost to playing. And so it's not really free to play even a free to play game, because there's always something else that you could be doing with your time, and that has value to you. Maybe it's a job and you're earning money from it. Maybe it's watching TV and that is really valuable to you, and maybe that's something that's more interesting to you than playing the game. And now, crucially, now that we're adding in this Web3 component, and it could be sort of this play to earn where you're kind of directly getting tokens, but even if it's just like there's a potential for you to get an item that's an NFT and that has value. Now there's some potential for you to have a financial output from the time that you're putting into this game. So now this potential audience has expanded even further out, because you're now compensating users for the opportunity cost of their time. And now that audience has expanded even further.
That's cool. Would you say then that, like, I know that the business models changed from premium games to free to play games. Like, how does the business model change for play to earn games? Let's just say.
Yeah. So there's various strategies for how to go about this. And so there's some games where they're putting in upfront cost still. And so like the common example of that is like where Axie Infinity started. You needed to buy an Axie or a team of Axies in order to play the game, and that's a substantial upfront cost. And so then kind of tying a little bit into re-NFT, and so potentially you can reduce that upfront cost through a renting system. And so now that's lowering the barrier there. But also another strategy to get, and even back to the idea of different sizes of that addressable market, is a free entry system, where there's essentially no upfront cost, but then still the potential for some sort of financial gain down the line. Again, that's something that you have to carefully manage, because if you have no input cost, the potential financial gain, you have to think very carefully about how someone could potentially exploit this system, given that there's no barriers to entry to that market.
I would also add on, like with Axie, I mean, they were making millions of dollars per day just off of trading volume, like taking their 2.5% or whatever, like a marketplace fee they had at the time. It seems like a lot of games will be kind of volume based, and the more volume you have, obviously, the more money you make, which will makes them very different from traditional gaming. Can you explain a little bit more about the concept of like what a non-fungible token is, and how do they impact an in-game economy and an open economy?
Yeah, and so the first kind of split of understanding what an NFT can be in an ecosystem, because fundamentally an NFT is just a technology. But in terms of what that can represent, you can have a cosmetic NFT, so purely focus on the visual impact in the game. My main utility can be as a status symbol, and so this is things like skins on your gun or a hat that looks pretty cool on your character. And then you have the in-game utility side. And so the in-game utility side, this is you buy something, and based on specifically which NFT you have, it has particular stats that can actually help you do better in the gameplay experience.
I see.
Yeah, and so people do think about the inflation of tokens, like that's starting to be a concept people understand of, like, okay, we need to put a little bit of planning on this or it might tank our economy. But I want to emphasize that controlling the supply of NFTs is also crucial. Any asset that you want to have value in your economy should be carefully controlled in terms of inflation. And so you need to look at like what is the real fundamental demand for NFTs in that market, and then carefully have supply controls to sort of balance that out and get the pricing, the rough pricing that you want for these assets. Sometimes with NFTs, it's important that they be within a particular pricing range. So this is especially if you're talking about utility assets. If this is a particular asset that you want the majority of the user base to be able to have and play with, you don't want that item to skyrocket in value and only be affordable to the 1%. So this is, you could think about how to implement price controls to keep things accessible, or even think about not necessarily everything has to be an NFT. It's not an all or nothing experience. And then then you can still have some assets that are fully free floating in value, essentially be your high value status symbols in the game. And so it's a pretty wide variety of how you can actually implement NFTs in your economy. But overall, it's a really amazing tool for the future of games.
Right, for sure. I agree. I mean, when you think about these NFTs that could be really high cost, I think obviously this is where we can talk a little bit more about NFT, rentals. How do you envision rentals being some sort of like onboarding mechanism, or simply like a mechanism to, retain users in the long run?
Yeah. And so one of the first things I think about in terms of how this can fit in is how this impacts user personas. And so kind of a general split you can see is the investor persona and the kind of gamer persona. So investors, they have capital that they want to deploy, but a lot of them, just in terms of defining this persona, they're not big gamers. They have money, they don't have much time. And so they're looking for a way to deploy their capital, and this persona is desirable to the game developers because they want capital to fund their project. And so they'll cater to these upfront by selling some sort of asset. But then if they have something that's purely kind of this value accrual asset and you don't need to do anything in the game for it, becomes very speculative, potential to be classified as a security. And so often they want to add in some sort of component around, you have to actually play the game to to get some sort of advantage from this. But if you're trying to target these investor personas that have no interest in playing the game, they're not going to want to buy that if you add that utility in. And so this is where you start to get the synergies between the investor persona and the player persona, where they don't have the capital to purchase this asset, but they do have the time to actually play with it. And so with a rental system, you're able to still have that asset with both of those components of it can accrue value, but it also requires active play in that game. And through a rental system, you can have an agreement between these two parties. So, example, if you think about like Heroes of Maybe a Land, so you get like a Clash of Clans style where you can have this land, it can accrue value, but it does so through actually playing the game, and you can now have the synergy between these two different types of parties.
Do you think? I mean, how for us when we see on the re-NFT side, it's usually like you work closer to launch sort of thought for rentals. Do you think that we'll see an uptrend of rentals being implemented, like as games launch, or do you see on your side like actual interest in rentals? Is it something that kind of pops up?
I think it depends a lot on the game, and yeah, because if there's a reason for essentially this high value asset in the system, like I think metaverse land, it can come up to some extent because that's a specific situation where if they're choosing land that is like location based, right? Not instance land. Instance land is like sort of think pocket dimension. You can have as much of it as you want, but with a metaverse land, they're locking themselves into having some sort of limitation on the supply of their land because you have cities. Theoretically, yes, you could create more land on the outskirts, but no one cares. No one wants to have the land out in the middle of nowhere. So in terms of the key areas, there's limitations. And so you are apparently going to have um, supply limitations, high value assets, and utility for being in those key areas. And so you can't kind of manipulate the supply to create accessibility. And
Mm,
so adding in rentals to those kind of experiences can provide that accessibility benefit and get more users into the system.
definitely. I think we still need to, I mean, obviously see a lot more games launch. It's like a chicken and the egg problem. We don't know what technology we need to solve the problems that we have because we don't have enough problems yet. Although I think we're getting there soon. How do you think major cryptocurrencies like Ether affect in-game economies, if any?
Yeah. So in terms of thinking about how currencies fit in, there's or tokens in general, I like to split that into two different categories of tokens and currencies. So one is your value accrual type of asset. So this is uh, acts sort of like equity. This is the token that's being sold to investors. There's some sort of value capture through dividends, buybacks, and burn. Just there's an expectation that the price is going to go up, and there's going to be
Mm,
a motivation for users to hold those tokens.
mm,
And then on the other side, you have your medium of exchange. And so this is what really, like from an economics perspective, is defined as a currency. This is
mm,
what users want. This is what you want people to spend. This is what is going to be the means for making peer-to-peer trades. And this kind of currency side is very important for enabling complex economies. While
mm,
value pool is sort of where we're at right now, and with kind of a heavy focus on raising funds,
mm,
I think as we get to more complex economies, need to be doing a little bit better job of creating these currencies in a desirable way.
mm,
What's been failing so far is that we've been creating very volatile currencies. And
mm,
so I'd make the claim that the vast majority of cryptocurrencies fail the traditional economics definition of being good currencies, purely
mm,
because of that extreme volatility. You
mm,
need stability for a currency if you want people to actually use it for trade. Because if you want to make a complex agreement where I'll buy something from you a month from now, if
mm,
if I can't try, if I don't know how much that currency is going to be worth in a month, that adds risk to me, and
mm,
I'm going to want to use an external currency. Um,
mm,
and so and so I think we need to explore more stability mechanisms for these currency designs within economies so that people will actually want to use them and spend them versus feeling like they just want to hold it because the price is going to go up. That's going to reduce the spending in your economy.
mm,
Ether specifically, um, it really depends on who your audience is here. I don't think it's a great currency as an actual currency or a medium of exchange in your economy, given that volatility, if you're targeting a mainstream audience. That being said, there are games such as Citadel, on-chain Web3 game, that
mm,
where they are choosing to use Ether as the medium of exchange.
mm,
And I've talked to like their economists about this, and they chose this specifically because they're targeting a Web3 audience. And
mm,
so, given that focus and understanding the risk preferences that a Web3 audience has, they're used to essentially Ethereum being like the baseline. They might be thinking of their gains and losses in terms of Ethereum, and they're used to the volatility that it has, and so
mm,
they're going to be more accepting of that and willing to use that as a currency. But
mm,
if they ever wanted to expand to a more mainstream audience, that would become significantly more problematic.
mm. Definitely. Have you seen more games experiment with like stable coins in their ecosystem or like mechanisms to like reduce volatility within the ecosystem of a currency?
Yeah, and so there's some teams that understand this as a problem
Mm,
and have gone towards using stablecoins. I believe it's Skyweaver is what I'm thinking of. That they've just gone full on stablecoin. But the recommendation that I want to make, and I'm trying to kind of promote this more as an option, is
yes.
having semi-stable currencies. And so there's actually a really good example of this working. So Second Life is kind of the OG metaverse. They've been around since 2003. And despite predating Bitcoin, they have a currency, Linden dollars, that's tradable for dollars. It's tradable as a peer-to-peer medium of exchange within their metaverse. For all intents and purposes, it's functionally equivalent to a cryptocurrency. Uh, but they have sort of this semi-stable model where it's not backed like 1-to-1 to a dollar. It has a fluctuating secondary market price against the dollar, but they keep it within a specific price range. And so they have reserves, which is something that a lot more teams should consider to back the value of your token. So you say we'll have this quantity of reserves, and so you can know for sure that it will never go below this certain price. And so that creates user confidence in that currency, because they think worst case scenario, I can sell it back for at least this price because those reserves are there. And in a Web3 context, you could even trust that more because you could back those reserves on chain. You wouldn't even need to trust the team. But then also they add, as well as kind of that price floor, they have a price ceiling. This is really important to combat speculation, because if there's no price ceiling and the price could go up as much as you want, then you could have kind of these pump and dump cycles, and then that's going to reduce the stability of your currency as well. You don't know how much it's going to be worth a month in the future. And so they can also say, we'll sell as much currency as needed at the ceiling price. And so now you have this currency that has a level of stability, and it's a level of controlled stability. So we talk a lot about like the dollar is seeing a huge amount of inflation. So you're creating your own currency that it's not tied to the monetary policy decisions of any country. You can create something that's customized to the needs of your own particular economy. And also you can make some money in the process. You can have a gap between that ceiling and floor price and the difference between what you sell the currency for and buy it back for. That's either revenue to the team, or it could be used as a pool for incentives for retaining users or growing your ecosystem. And so this is something that I think should be explored much more in the Web3 context. I haven't seen it yet, but we have an example of a metaverse that's been around for 20 years, has a $650 million GDP, which is larger than like 12 countries that's successfully using this. So I think we should see a lot more exploring of that semi-stable model in the future.
I did not know that, and that's super interesting. I know that there's a lot of people that kind of reference Second Life as being, the game to kind of watch and learn from. Like, I wonder why people don't implement more like the semi-stable coin idea. Because I remember when I was in Axie Infinity and people were trading SLP like crazy, like SLP to $1, but like that obviously changes the entire kind of game economics within the game and makes it kind of like a sucky experience, because it's like, oh, I could have breeded yesterday, but now it's X amount more. How do you think like Web3 technologies can have like a negative impact, if any, on the broader gaming industry or within a game? We've already talked about it a little bit.
Yeah, so in terms of negative effects there, you're allowing retail users to take an investment role in games, and game content specifically is a very risky investment category. A lot of games fail, and a lot of them don't even get off the ground. And I think there's a gap in knowledge from the general retail community of their expectations of what a game will be and what it will achieve, especially financially, versus the reality. And so we're still very early in this cycle. And so I think there are going to be a lot of projects that haven't burned. And even for people that have been investing since the beginning, like I bought into my first blockchain game like 5 years ago at this point, and I've held some that I've seen already, like games just drop off, like have several years of development fully drop off. My investment's gone to zero. And given this bigger wave of retail, and now there's going to be a large wave of that coming, where there's a gap between that knowledge base and the actual reality of the situation. And so there's potential for people getting burned. Also potentially risk of over financialization. I hopefully we're moving away from that. We saw the extremes of it with like the play to earn, where the entire focus was on the earning experience.
Right.
But there's still components of it that are slightly problematic to the player experience, and that we shouldn't overlook as we kind of build out the systems. Where if you're playing a game and you get an item that has real value, I still think that's a really good experience. But the potential drawback is that you there is some tension in some mental tension of, maybe I really like this item and I want to play with it in the game, but it might be worth so much that I can't in good conscience like not sell it. And
Mm,
just because it's worth so much, and so that could still hurt a little bit. Like, it's not going to hurt
mm,
that much. You have some dollars in your pocket, but in terms of the actual game experience, um, in a Web2 game, they really would have enjoyed playing that. It just, you're creating a little bit of cognitive dissonance, adding the
mm.
financial component. And it is something that we should be aware of when designing these games.
Definitely. I mean, I've seen a lot more people mention specifically like we are not play to earn, or like we're moving away from play to earn. I don't know if that's like the all the issues that are happening, but obviously I think it's the number one that people have realized. What do you think are some other obstacles that will affect the emergence and adoption of Web3 in gaming?
Yeah, actually, maybe the one that's been so the biggest one that used to get thrown around was the user experience. Like,
Mm,
since blockchain gaming started in 2018, it was all about like, it's so hard for users to use blockchain. They need to get a MetaMask wallet. And so the trend I've been seeing, having the perspective of being in this for a while, is that I think we're actually almost at the point where UX is not the main problem anymore. There's so
mm,
many people building out infrastructure right now that I think as we have this upcoming wave of hopefully high quality Web3 games coming, that there
right.
should be enough infrastructure in place that UX doesn't have to be the primary barrier anymore.
Mm,
So in terms of what the remaining barriers might be, I think the first one to tackle is going to be sort of stigma against NFTs. The
mm,
first kind of wave of NFTs, very cash grabby in terms of what the mainstream audience saw from the communities. And it's fair. Like, there was a lot of cash grabbiness in that kind of NFT mania wave, and sort of scamish reputation. But that can be broken through. Really, what we just need there is some examples of quality games with non-exploitative monetization strategies, and really show the value that the NFT technology can provide, and that it doesn't have to be that cash grab, doesn't have to be
mm.
exploiting the users.
Do you think
Um, yeah, go ahead.
was going to mention, like, do you think it's also like a narrative thing? Like we saw Reddit launch their digital collectibles and it seemed to do well.
Yeah, yeah, like the naming thing, it can affect some users' perceptions,
Mm,
but others, I think, sort of see through it, and so I think it matters more just having an example of how
mm.
they can be used in a good way versus just continuing to change the name and doing the same thing.
Right,
Uh,
right.
and another another challenge, and I'm obviously a little biased with this one, is actually creating sustainable economies.
Mm,
So a lot of teams are just not putting enough thought into this, just kind of copying existing models, which haven't really worked so far. And even if they do copy something that works for someone else, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to fit their own particular goals.
definitely. No, I agree. I think there's a lot of copy paste in the industry right now. Do you think that regulation is possibly another one that will pop up as like an issue?
Yeah, there's regulation is a big unknown right now, and so teams are for the most part taking this very seriously, but it's difficult because the lawyers are not giving clear answers. They're
Mm,
basically saying that, like, this strategy, you're probably okay. This strategy is slightly higher risk. We can't tell you anything for sure. And that's also probably scaring off a lot of potential developers. So I think once we have clearer regulations set out, that could actually be a catalyst for growth in this space, because there's just so much uncertainty around it right now, that people are scared of being on the wrong side of it. But I do think that there's a lot of designs that might get blown up depending on how regulation falls. There's a lot of kind of these value accrual tokens, especially that are doing just enough in terms of non-financial utility to try to be not classified as securities, but the line of where securities are drawn could get moved at any time, and a large number of projects can potentially fall on the wrong side of it.
Right. I like what you said about regulation might be a catalyst, because I agree. I think if we can for the entire kind of crypto industry, if we can understand what's happening on the back end, then obviously people will trust it more, especially after like the FTX fallout, essentially. I think there's a lot of mistrust there. How do you think that the emergence of Web3 gaming will impact the traditional gaming industry, and what should traditional gaming companies be doing to adapt, or just be doing to kind of be on the lookout for what's to happen?
Yeah, so I think it could reframe player expectations about owning their items, owning the time that they put into virtual experiences. Because once you're used to sort of being compensated for this and owning the items, I feel like it's going to be hard for some users to go back. Or they might still be playing. It will. The most important thing probably still will be the core game experience itself. Like, it's not going to stop from playing a high quality Web2 game, but it might still impact their spending. So while they might have spent well, they might have spent like $5 previously on like a Web2 item, maybe it'll drop to $4 because now they kind of have this expectation of this is less valuable to me versus spending that extra dollar in a game where it's going to have residual value to me, where I can potentially sell it back in the future. And so they might shift some of their spending towards towards the Web3 side. It also could translate to higher pricing potentially in Web3. It's kind of like a sliding scale of how that value is adjusted. But yeah, I do think it's going to shift those expectations a little bit. And yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's going to switch over completely. Like there will still be all these Web2 games that have premium models and free to play models. It's kind of just creating this other option in the market, but I think it will eat up a lot of the potential market share. And so some game publishers and developers, I think, are probably going to just hedge their bets a little bit, and maybe especially the bigger ones might focus more on acquisitions, so see sort of what ends up sticking in Web3, and then using acquisitions as a strategy to get get exposed to it, because I think the larger industry is understanding the shift. A lot of high quality teams are going in that direction, which is really good to see at this point. And honestly, the amount of traction it's getting is even still a little bit surprising to me, given how little we've actually seen stick yet.
I like that. I wanted to ask, like, when it comes to Web3 games, can there be like Web2 games that implement Web3 tech that we don't consider as like a Web3 game? Like, maybe it's not something that has a super high mint value, or it's just simply something that like you mint something that allows you to get ownership of something in the game, which essentially retains users for longer. Like, do you see, I guess, web kind of almost 2.5 gaming coming?
Yeah, I think that is a good step in the direction here, because we need to gradually pull in mainstream users. I think you can't have the focus be like blockchain first. That should kind of be hidden here. And so having the smoothest process possible for getting users to test out this technology is beneficial for the space as a whole. I think the best way to get adoption is to have users like come for an experience that they don't even realize has blockchain based, is blockchain based, enjoy the core game, and then once they're sort of involved in it, give them the easiest possible intro to NFTs. It should ideally be something that has no cost to them. It's they play a game they like, they get some items, and then they find out, oh wow, this is on chain. I could sell this if I want. They didn't have anything. They didn't feel like, oh, this is a cash grab. I'm being forced to buy something, or I need an NFT to fully enjoy this game. It's just I've got something that's potentially valuable. That's kind of cool. Oh, that NFTs can be used for more than that. And once they sort of open up to that option, then they're going to be more might be more interested in exploring the variety of different ways NFTs can be implemented in more closer to full on Web3 experiences.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we see that a lot more. I think I've seen, because like obviously games that have Web2, like that are Web2 game already have the game live. So it's much easier for them to just kind of like go out into market. And I mean, any way that they can implement, I think Web3, like you said, in a seamless way is going to be super beneficial for user onboarding. Like, how can you walk us through a little bit more about how you've seen the user onboarding narrative kind of change, as you mentioned, and then what are some of the key technologies, the key innovations that have happened that will enable that user onboarding kind of mechanism to really be able to reach mass adoption?
Yeah, so the technical side of the user experience is really key here, and so they should not you shouldn't have the first experience be like connect wallet. And so I guess an example, like I didn't go for like the Digi Daigaku mint in the Super Bowl, but I was just talking to someone about it that did try for it, and they said like you get to the site and the first thing you saw is connect wallet. That should not be the onboarding flow. Because they don't have a wallet. Like there's a lot of steps to create a wallet right now. They should have the ability for self custody wallets, but if you really want to reach the widest audience possible, you're going to have to accept that not everyone is going to want to do self custody wallets. You need the ability to just sign in traditional Web2 ways, like sign in with Gmail and have the wallet experience be done completely for them. As an option. So it's really about creating options. If you want to capture the largest amount of users, capture those who are comfortable with Web3 and self-custody, and capture those that are not. And so the initial onboarding flow, especially, like they don't need to have ownership of anything when they're first entering the game, because like has been figured out with kind of all the experimentation that happened in mobile, like or games in general, actually, it's like the initial flow of getting into the game is super critical, because you can lose users at any stage of the onboarding. And so your first time user experience should not have anything required to get on it in regards to crypto, wallets, gas. All of that should be abstracted away. Even the marketing part of it, like you shouldn't mention blockchain, you shouldn't mention crypto. All of those are potential barriers to some portion of your total addressable market. And so all of that needs to be abstracted away, hidden, or at least pushed until you're much deeper into the experience and you're already engaged in the core game.
Definitely. What are some things that you point your people that you work with, your game devs, towards when it comes to like either a non-custodial solution or a custodial solution, if you feel free to share?
I don't have top picks on this yet. Yeah, I probably should figure out some more. But yeah, I haven't seen anything that's like a clear winner yet, so I don't want to necessarily pick winners there.
For sure. Yeah, I don't think that we can pick something. I do like you mentioned Skyweaver. Obviously, that's kind of Horizons and Sequences kind of game. It's got like the use case for their non-custodial wallet, which I think is interesting and somewhat needed, because you obviously need to understand how the product works on your front to be able to showcase like why your product is better at the end of the day. which is very much so needed. So what are some pieces of advice that you would give a new game developer getting into Web3 gaming? You've already talked through a lot of things that I think are very confusing for someone who's just getting started, but for someone who does want to get started, like how can they get started?
Yeah, I'd recommend that, like, don't overlook the importance of engaging with the community. So this is about, like, you should have a community manager who is Web3 native, understands that process, but also the founder themselves. Kind of analysis recently of, like, the engagement of the founder is important too. So it's not just get a community manager, delegate it all to them, but there needs to be ongoing engagement and need to actually listen to the community too. They can be it's you can get valuable feedback on the experience of through the stages of development to help craft a product that's actually aligned with the interests of your user base, which you're cultivating before you even have anything for them to play. And then also on the economic side, start thinking about the economics early. It shouldn't be something where you have completely finished your game and then think about, oh, how can we tack the economic part onto this? They're going to be interrelated to various extents, depending on the type of game you're building. But it should be at least considered relatively early how you're going to combine these together, not just have to be an afterthought.
So in other words, they should contact you to help out.
Yeah, that's one way to say it. But even if not, think from first principles and think about it early.
For sure. Yeah, I definitely agree. We'd love to kind of get your kind of personal views on what excites you the most in Web3 gaming, and possibly what game excites you the most as well.
Yeah, I'm just really excited in quality games actually launching. I've been waiting so long for that, and I really thought that we would have some better products earlier. But again, we're seeing a lot of good development now, so we're getting there. And I guess it's still important that they take the time to actually push out something that's good, rather than a rush job. I'm really looking forward to Ember Sword. They're building a great MMORPG, very accessible in terms of it being. They're building an engine to make this like fully browser-based, play on any device. I think that's super key. Just back from like my roots of playing games, I've spent a lot of my time playing just browser-based games. Before even going into like larger, heavier experiences, playing on like not great computers. Right. So I admire that focus and think that will help it reach a wider audience. So really interested in Ember Sword there. Interested in the shooter side as well. Shrapnel, I think it's going to be an amazing game. They have a great team, and they're innovating on this kind of new structure of creating an extraction shooter with much more at stake. And so leveraging Web3 to elevate the kind of risk reward and tension of that extraction, because you have these kind of real value items on the line. And I think that's going to be an amazing experience. And then also I'm really enjoying playing I think it's alpha or maybe it's beta now of Superior. Kind of it's sort of roguelike first-person shooter, or no, third-person shooter. Gives kind of like Borderlands vibes. I really like that experience. I like first-person shooters, but especially kind of more like not necessarily PvP, but kind of that cooperative experience. Really enjoyed Borderlands, and so that's kind of very much in my corner of interest there. So excited to see where they go, and as they continue to add in more Web3 components.
That's cool. No, I love those recommendations. I'm gonna have to check them all out when I get off the stream. I finished with the questions I've written down, but I have some personal questions that I would love to see if we could talk about, which is I've seen a lot of games, more specifically game studios and game publishing companies create like outside of the game, an ecosystem that surrounds the game. Think about, you know, like Magic. Think about what Tilting Point is coming out with, like Power Up. Do you think that that will help in game, like specifically in game economics, with this like kind of outer game economics tied to it? Or how do you kind of see that moving in the future?
Yeah, I think it's really important actually to think about economics as something that can surround a game. Like it can be tied into it, but actually maybe I'll crystallize this a little more with an example of another game that I'm interested in actually, which is Nor. And so with Nor, they are creating an experience where they're carefully segmenting but interconnecting the core game experience and the outer like meta economy. And
Mm,
so the the comparison they made is like with soccer or football, depending on where you are. That the with soccer itself, like that game is not influenced. It's not where you have the actual financial experience or the actual economics. Like the game itself is pure. It's not you're not going with the full and pay to win. It's you have the monetization outside of it through the advertising, the sponsorships, the stadium,
mm,
all that. And with Nor, they have nothing should be affecting the kind of esports ready gameplay. Like they're building out all these games. Like if there's advertising, the people around will see it, but it will not. It will be abstracted away for the actual gamers. Like nothing will get in their way. They will have the purest, not farthest away from pay to win experience possible. So you have
mm,
kind of the pure game experience, and then around that you have all the meta layer of people who have roles in the economy about managing teams, managing broadcasting rights and sponsorships, building out everything that's needed to kind of build up this economy, grow it around the central pure gaming experience.
mm, I like that. I think, like, do you, so is that still the same for things like, you know, Treasure, where they're tying almost all of their games to one currency? I don't think so, but I guess I would like to hear your thoughts on what what are the benefits and possibly drawbacks of that?
Yeah, and so having kind of this interconnected ecosystem, I think, is really interesting. And I think of it kind of as like arcade like ecosystems of you're creating value around you're creating a large set of ways to create value with these different types of games um, that can create utility for the assets in your ecosystem.
Mm,
Um, and a big portion of that is helps with longevity because games, the vast majority of games have a limited and relatively short lifespan. And so creating this ecosystem um, gives gives it a way to continue to evolve and give these assets ongoing economic relevance because it's
mm,
not just tied to one game that will eventually kind of die out, but is used in an ongoing ecosystem that evolves to serve different needs as gamers move between games and the overall ecosystem evolves. But again, it's you got to think carefully around what do those assets do in that ecosystem? If
mm,
they accrue value, how do they accrue value in regards to all these gaming experiences? Or if it's a currency, how can it be made a good currency such that it can serve all of these different sub economies within the overall system? You might
mm,
need different currencies for each game that kind of tie into the overall experience. It really just depends on exactly what you're building. But overall, I do think that we're going to see an evolution of kind of this arcade like model of interconnected experiences. Is it Treasure's kind of a decentralized one, but I think
mm,
it's going to be even more prevalent when we're talking about game studios,
mm,
where and this ties into interoperability as well as for why I think this will happen.
Right.
I think we'll see teams that they're building out multiple games. They're using their NFTs and their currencies, because they can leverage the benefits of interoperability for retention to their specific studio. It's you have a player that they've played through one game, they really enjoyed it, they've accumulated a set of NFTs, but they've run through the content and now they're going to jump somewhere else. And so if you can influence their decision of jumping to a game from a different studio versus another one of yours because they can leverage their existing NFTs within your ecosystem, then that is a net benefit to them. But the interoperability, I think, for the most part, will be tied to that specific developer's ecosystem, just because you add in this level of competition if you allow full-on interoperability from outside. Because if you allow in NFTs from another game studio, suddenly that's competing with the sale of primary and secondary sale of assets within your own ecosystem, or potentially if there's like UGC, you're creating competition for your own community members and the content that they create. So yeah, that's why I kind of think we're going to head much more towards this interconnected arcade system specifically for each studio.
That's cool. I like that. I also like the explanation you had of Nor. I think that it speaks to just like what works in real life, I guess, and what hopefully will work in gaming. And I think esports is starting to be a huge thing. So it's exciting to see that it's starting to grow and going to be a true business model in Web3 gaming. Again, I want to thank you so much for kind of coming on board and sharing your thoughts on we ran through a lot. I still have a lot of questions from a lot of things, but it was really great to hear your thoughts on where we're going, what's happened in the past, and I think what game developers can learn. For our audience, like I hope you learned a lot from Kiefer's insight into Web3 gaming economics. I'm sure that we will hear much more from him in the future. If you don't follow him on LinkedIn and on Twitter, please do. He posts a lot of great content on how games can be kind of more economically, I guess, thoughtful and conscious within their games, which is super insightful. Also, Kiefer, if you don't mind sharing like what your links are, that would be great.
Yep, all my links are just my name at Kiefer Zang. Yeah, Kiefer, and looking forward to connect with anyone. Always, my DMs are always open, so looking forward to continuing to contribute to the space. And thanks so much for having me, Juan.
Of course, and we'll keep on bringing more interesting guests that are disrupting the Web3 gaming space. And don't forget to follow our channels as well, and stay tuned for the next episode. And if you're a game developer looking to diversify your game economics, we have a solution for you. Reach out at renft.io and let's talk about NFT rentals as we talked about today. Until next time, and again, thank you, Kiefer.
Thanks, Juan.
Later.